Welcome to The Independent Musician. Our weekly podcast will focus on the independent artist and the music market at large. You'll hear from those artists as well as music execs, tech experts, and marketing leaders from around the globe. We'll discuss what it takes to make it in the biz and how you can overcome obstacles as you progress your craft, all the while making it interesting and fun. Now, here's your host, Mark Skoda.
Okay, this is Mark Skoda, and you're listening to another Independent Musician podcast. I'm with a very interesting individual tonight, Benjamin Kapit. Ben is going to talk to us about his career, and he's been in everything from audio to video to music, and started very early on. I'd like to introduce Benjamin Kapit. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. I'm excited to be here.
So we talked a little bit before the start of the podcast. You're sitting in the D.C. area, as I like to joke, the best city money can buy, $4 trillion a year and counting. And you've been there your whole life, you mentioned. So obviously your background in bio really talks about your whole videography and movie making and writing skills and later on into music. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got there and where you came from?
Sure. So I, as you mentioned, I live right outside of DC. I was born here. Aside from a couple years at college in Massachusetts, I've lived here my whole life. My parents were always very get the kids exposed to as much as possible so that when they have to pick a career, they will be able to pick what suits them the best. And I just fell in love with the creative elements of film and music. I started learning piano at 6 years old because my brother was learning piano and I think he's the coolest person ever. So I wanted to learn piano like him. And my father had a camera that he would take pictures of your family events with. And I thought that was the coolest thing. I was like, oh my God, I can capture time with this little device that I can hold in my hands. So as soon as I had hands big enough to actually hold a camera, I was using that. And from there, it just turned into this obsession with telling stories that I couldn't tell otherwise, that I couldn't tell in some other way.
You know, it's interesting because obviously I've talked to a lot of artists and a lot of creators, and it is interesting that even my own son, who started playing drums at 4, although before that he had his first drum at 18 months old. I always joke he came out of the womb drumming. There is inherently a passion in people when they get into a particular area of creativity, a creator generally. You know, within business, you sort of meander through and figure out what you like, what you fit into. You know, you don't start off saying, I want to be an accountant or I want to be a vice president. But it's very different in the arts, isn't it? I mean, there's a tendency to
Absolutely.
sort of fall in love with something very early on in life, I find.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. I don't remember a lot of my early life because I was a kid and most people don't, but my parents and my siblings and the people that knew me then have always told me, they're like, yeah, I'm not surprised at all that you're going into this. This is what you're picking to do with your life. It just makes sense for the people that have known me my whole life.
So you started obviously a company, production company at 15 years old, Second World Entertainment, when you were 15, and basically doing a lot of video work. In fact, you're producing a couple of short films recently. Did you have formal training? I guess that's the other question. You know, video and videography and writing generally requires some sort of formal training. Did you do that?
I attended YouTube University.
There you go.
I've had formal training in certain aspects of the art that I do, more heavily in music than in film. But much of what I learned in film for most of my life came from knowing what the right questions were to ask Google. And I would stay up late at night reading the camera manuals for the cameras that I had. I remember when I turned 12 or 13, my parents got me an entry-level DSLR, and I stayed up reading the camera manual and learning everything that the camera could do. And from there, most of the formal training that I've gotten when it comes to the film side of my work has been in the theory element of it. So rather than how to put the camera together and how to use the camera, it's been more in, you want to tell this story, why do you want to set this shot up, how do you want to structure the story, that element of it.
Right. It's interesting. I don't know if you've seen the film with Steven Spielberg, on his sort of orientation and his foundings of his work as a cinematographer very early on as well. Very interesting. The whole idea of being fascinated with the device first and sort of telling a story. There's an inherent element of videography that goes beyond the framing of the individual or the storyline itself, but it is actually the way you tell the story and the way you're able
Absolutely.
to dialogue sort of through your video work.
Absolutely. Much of the narrative work. There's this myth that every person that I've worked with and every person that I teach kind of gets a little disappointed when they find out that in film, the creative element, the creativity doesn't happen when you're on set. It happens beforehand in the planning phase, and it happens afterwards when you're editing it. But so much of filmmaking to me is sitting in meetings with my cinematographer and my art director and my production designer and saying, okay, why are we doing what we're doing? My cinematographer suggests this shot. Okay, why? What does that add to the story? What does that help tell?
Right. I can remember, just as a side note, my claim to fame in my own videography was 8mm in high school in my senior year. And my buddy and I were the only two out of our class who took on the actual act of doing a film, because that was one of the tasks in a art class we were engaged. And we started off saying, what do we want to talk about? Well, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and Brook Park was the nearby area. And there was an engine stamping plant in Brook Park. And so you would get a lot of the sort of smokes and everything else, because at that time Cleveland was a steel town as well. So we did this video and we shot it and we spliced it all together back when you spliced 8mm. And I never forget, we ended up recording music from Three Dog Night and Bread, and had to sort of kick off the 8mm and then at the same time press the cassette player so that we could have the music matching to the film. And we told the story, and it was pretty cool. By the way, we aced that. It was a lot of fun. And back when those kinds of challenges, we didn't have the sophistication of the software tools. But the point of the story is, as you've identified, it's always about what is the story you're going to tell first. Storyboarding, writing it out, creating some, not even as necessary a script, but essentially creating the vision for who and what you're going to communicate. And I think that's critical in any sort of creative outlet. It's not just about taking a whole bunch of film and figuring out what the story is going to be later on.
I absolutely agree.
Now, Ben, are you at this point engaged full time in your practice for videography and music? Is this your life's work? Is this your job?
This is my job. It is. I am a full-time freelance right now. I do things on the side. Sometimes I teach film and music, which helps. But in general, full-time, I am gigging and producing for music and film.
Now, you were started at 15 here. How old are you now? I didn't ask that.
I'm 22.
So 7-year process, and you actually are now doing this for a living. That's, as many people say, that's a definition of success, isn't it?
I think that I have done very well for what I've always wanted, but I also think that I have a lot farther to go, though I'm very happy with where I am.
Well, as we say in the business, you're just a child yet, by comparison to me.
I fully agree with that.
So you've got a lot of time.
I'm a kid.
But, it's interesting. The point is, you start off that early on and you're working your plan and planning your work. And at the end of the day, you're engaged in a project and engaged in a development of a company that is now actually allowing you to make a living. And that's, is really important in today. I find it also interesting, as I talk to a lot of people, that the creators really work very hard over a longer period of time before they actually find success. In other words, they have to figure out where they're going, continue to hit the pavement hard, and ultimately that consistency, that application of their talents together with the content they're creating can result in a positive outcome, such as a job and making a living at it.
Absolutely.
So as you sort of have gone through this process, I think, a couple of things I mentioned, I want you to talk a little about, you have a couple of short films you're doing, but you've been doing a couple of seasons of Apocalypse 92.7 FM, which I found fascinating. I want to know what that was about. So can you, and then I think you have another show called The Sunrise House. Apocalypse sounds pretty interesting. FM radio as well. So help me understand, what is that and what's that about?
Sure. So Apocalypse came from the concept of Welcome to Night Vale. I thought it was really cool. And I initially tried to write it as an audio drama of sorts, but I am such a visual person that it just ended up turning into a show. The plot of it is a young woman has survived some form of an apocalypse, something like 100 years in the future. And while traversing the wasteland, finds a news studio of sorts, locks herself in it, and begins to broadcast her voice to an empty world.
Interesting. Cool. And so is that picked up? Is that available on YouTube? Is it picked up by any distributors, or can people
It
see
is
that?
not available anywhere yet. We are
Oh,
still in post production for it.
cool.
But when it is ready, it will be available on our website, which is just secondworldfps.com. And who knows, maybe it'll get picked up by someone. My hope is to edit it together as a movie and run it through some festivals and see if anything
Hmm.
comes of that, because it was written as a show, but it works as a movie.
Yeah, because I think it's an interesting concept. Obviously, there are a lot of apocalyptic movies out. I think that's kind of cool, tying in sort of FM radio. We think about today with radio being essentially not the medium it was even a few years ago. I mean, the Gen
Right.
Zers no longer even listen to radio in their car. I mean, the fundamental is they're listening to their phone in the car, or Sirius XM if they're lucky, but most people are streaming what they want to listen to when they want to listen to it. So I think your premise is even more interesting in the context of, well, guess what? FM radio, it's not being listened to today because there's so much choice out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was I wanted to go for kind of a mixture of, oh, it's 100 years in the future, but they're still using these analog techniques.
Right, right. So obviously, as you've come through this process of filmmaking, you've also moved into some of your musical efforts. Tell us a little bit how you got there, and how has that been an outcome, or perhaps concurrent to what your efforts are on film?
Sure. So it's actually the other way around. Music came first for me. I started learning piano, as I mentioned, when I was 5 or 6 years old. And from there, I started adding instruments. And at this point, I couldn't even count how many I know a bunch, just kind of half like offhand, how to play instruments. So I can kind of play the trumpet. I can kind of do some flute stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got more and more interested in at least watching films, I started to become obsessed with film scoring and the concept of using music to accent a story told through a movie. And so I would sit at the piano for hours and I would listen to movie scores by Alan Silvestri and Hans Zimmer and Michael Giacchino and Brian
Yes.
Tyler. And I would learn how to play them on the piano. And then I would start to morph them into something that was more my style. And over time, I wanted to become I became obsessed with becoming a film composer. And these days I'm less focused on that and more focused on uh, songwriting and production and making movies. But there is still a huge part of me that loves film scores, and I still score all of my own films.
It's interesting. There's a couple of great documentaries. One of them is actually called Score. And if you haven't picked it up or seen it on Amazon, I think it's a really great movie. It really talks about how film has sustained, to a large degree, orchestras and the creative
Yep.
process in music making of an orchestral nature, because we're not writing new classics today, but there are people doing that. But having said that, film has really just generated an entire new capability and some of the most extraordinary music coming out of people like Zimmer, as you've talked about, and others. Great movie, by the way. There's a couple others out there too that I've seen. So when you, as you sort of moved into then the music side, as I mentioned to you when we sort of kicked off, there's a whole sort of electronic element to your music sound, which is very cool. It's got a great vibe. Do you compose yourself these songs beforehand, and are you using other musicians to help you on the instrumentation? Or are you doing all the instruments yourself, laying them in?
So I do most of it myself. There are a few tracks here and there that will have someone else maybe performing an instrument, but I do all of the writing myself. And I have always been fascinated with the intersection of electronic elements and orchestral elements. So a lot of my music will have, a hard saw synth going up right against a French horn,
Right.
or it will be very electronic, and then all of a sudden in the middle of it, it will cut to a breakdown that is just, spiccato strings and some staccato winds and horns. So I love the um, almost like AJR. I don't know if you know them, but like AJR-esque
Oh,
combination
yes. Yep.
of analog and electronic instruments.
Cool. So basically, I mean, a lot of the work you're doing right now is to form a sort of baseline for your music and essentially commercialize that in some form or fashion. I know you've just released the Sorry Carnival.
Yes.
Obviously, for the audience, it's Dreamers Club is your Spotify account. That's Dreamers with apostrophe S Club. So tell us about the current release, the Sorry Carnival, and we'll probably play that through here in a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So the Sorry Carnival is the first single that I released off of my upcoming album, which I cannot share the name yet because it is secret. But I I don't entirely remember where it came from. I kind of dissociate when I write a lot of my music and when I produce it. So I'll sit down at the piano or sit down at the computer, and then I kind of blink my eyes, and it's like 5 hours later, and I have the skeleton of a song down. It came from the song itself came from the piano thing that you hear, the da 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 da,
Right.
which is like throughout the entire thing. And then I love. I'll actually go back. There's a story for this. In my freshman year, first semester of college, I took a creative writing class, and my professor had us do this exercise where we would write a couple pages of sentences that all start with the exact same phrase. And the first exercise was starting with the phrase, I remember. And we would go through, I remember blank, I remember blank. And it could just be a list of things you remember, or, you could turn it into something a little bit more artistic and metaphorical. And I love that. And I love the idea of an entire piece from a single idea or a single phrase. And I think that I, as a person, apologize for things way too much, even when I maybe don't need to apologize for things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this song came from the idea of, let me just apologize for everything that I feel like I have done wrong.
Why don't you take us through some of these sessions and maybe give us some insights into, what you were doing with this song and what it means?
Sure. So the song starts off in terms of writing with me sitting down at the piano and playing this is from the actual session. And so that became the entire song. I mean, that is played throughout the entirety of the rest of this track here, except for the little choruses. You hear that the da 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 throughout the entirety of it.
Right.
I wanted this song to be very in your face. I wanted it to be a ton of elements going at once, super, like compressed and shoved out the speakers right down the audience's mouth. So I went for a ton of synths and a lot of, very heavy drums. The kicks right here, I'll play these. They're actually made out of 3 kick samples. So I wanted to go very heavy.
Right.
There is 0 processing on them. They are just pulled straight out of splice and tossed on the quarter notes there. And then this harsh snare that's just, I think, a stock Logic plugin. And overall, I just it's this big feel here. I'll just play. Point of view, there'd be no way I'd make it through. There's a bunch of elements going, and then we get to this chorus here, and I have this friend who used to make fun of my old music because it didn't take a standard structure, so there would be no choruses. So I said, what if I write a chorus just for her that is very short and apologizes for the fact that it's not a good chorus? So
okay.
I'll play it's just piano and the vocals, which, sorry that I wrote all those sad songs, and this little guitar thing under it. Sorry that I still have more to come. Sorry that this chorus isn't longer or that I am out of rhymes. So I thought it would be funny to just toss that to her of like, sorry, this chorus isn't longer, and I couldn't come up with anything else to rhyme. So back to the verse. And then I used to I would get crap from my friends about, oh, you only write sad music. So I did the sorry that I wrote all those sad songs, and sorry that I still have more to come, because a lot of my upcoming music is still very sad, because I process a lot of my emotions through writing these songs and through writing music. So I
It's
put
a
the sad
catharsis,
emotions somewhere.
a definite catharsis.
Exactly. And then throughout I'm going to pull up the lyrics here so that I know what I'm talking about. I actually recently filmed a music video for this, and I had to check myself every time we did a new verse because I didn't remember the lyrics for this, even though I wrote it, which is pretty standard for me. But it was worse for this one. So all of this song, aside from all the, I'm sorry I did this, I'm sorry I did that, it's kind of about the being young and growing up in this world. I feel like, the odds are kind of against us, like against these younger generations, because everything is super expensive and the world is kind of falling apart. And I'm like, wow, I'm super sad, but I'm kind of surprised that I've made it this far and that I'm still going. And maybe at some point we'll get there. We'll get to the good part. And so that's I can't believe I'm still alive in 2023. This might be fun. My music's getting more uplifting. That line is all about the kind of, we're, all of this sucks, but at least right now we're alive and we're okay.
We're still here. That's right.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because music has always reflected society generally, right? I mean, most music does. And whether it was the rock songs post 50s that came in with Elvis Presley and the like, and then in the 70s when we sort of had the whole social unrest, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And today, I think the zeitgeist of today is really, about all this social change that's happening, cancel culture, all the confusion in people generally, as well as just the economic issues that are facing the younger generation. So not too far from reality. Why don't you play it through and let's listen to the song, okay?
Sure.
Opinions or your point of view, there'd be no way I'd make it through today. I can't believe I'm still alive in 2023. This might be fun. My music's getting more uplifting. Something's wrong, this isn't me. I'm happier, this year might be the one. Sorry that I wrote all those sad songs. Sorry that I still have more to come. Sorry that this chorus isn't longer, or that I am out of rhymes. I used to play this game when I was younger, where I'd say I'd done no wrong, that I'd grow up with no regrets and all my family just played along. I never learned till I grew up that I'd live my whole life wishing I'd die. I'm tired and I'm broken, so I sit here writing songs I wish were lies. Sorry that I wrote all those sad songs. Sorry that I still have more to come. I'm sorry that this chorus isn't longer, or that I am out of rhymes.
Very cool. The Sorry Carnival. Ben, that's pretty slick. I got to tell you what I like about
Thank you.
that. First of all, you think about a carnival, right? There's the cacophony of sound and action all going on everywhere you look,
Right.
right? So one, you very well communicate that in this piece of music, and I think the instrumentation, the synths, etc., very cool. But also, what I thought was really good was when everything drops out and it's just your vocals and that piano on the chorus, and it sort of rests your ears for a second. It's sort of like when you stop for a little cotton candy and you're not on a ride.
Absolutely.
And so I thought that was really that's the way it came across to me. There's the piano piece that you have there. There's actually a song that is not too dissimilar that opens with that sort of key. It's like I wish I could remember it, but I've heard that sort of piano piece, and I'll have to think about it. That is sort of one of those Copacabana type songs.
Yeah.
But little bits of it come through in that. But I think it's really very, very cool. And I really enjoyed that. I hope the audience did as well.
Me too. Yeah,
So,
I had a lot of fun with this. This is actually my first track ever released that includes live drums.
oh, right. Okay. So I see that was Brandon drums there, right?
Yeah, so my friend Brandon, who actually plays for a different band called Phantom Hourglass, he was very kind, and he jumped on this track. I hopped over to his house and set up my little rack and all of the drum microphones, and we went through like probably 6 songs on my upcoming album and just nailed them all in one session.
So when's the album coming out? And what you don't want to tell the title, of course, that's top secret. But when is the
It's
album
top
coming
secret.
out?
So it is coming out either late July or early August.
Good. Is it
We
a
haven't
full
settled on
album?
an exact date yet, but it is a full album. Yes, it has 14 tracks.
Wow, great. So you've been hard at work and still at work. And are you
I have been, yeah, I'm still working on it.
are you collaborating with anybody else on the full album?
There are a few other people who are featured artists on it, but I wrote and produced the whole thing myself.
Terrific. I'll look forward to hearing that because, clearly it's eclectic music, right? And I listened to a couple of the other tracks, and obviously I've seen growth in what you're doing, and even to the current release. Obviously you are definitely communicating, right? As hopefully I responded in the way that you would have expected me, both in terms of what you were talking about in terms of the song itself, but also the feeling it gave me as I listened to the song and the instrumentation that you put together, which I thought was very cool. Very cool indeed. So what are you doing now?
I'm super proud of the, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, that's all right.
I'm super proud of the instrumentation I did for this one, specifically near the end of the track when it stops being just all of these synths and the piano and all of their a flute, piccolo, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, 2 French horns, a tenor and bass trombone, and a tuba all come in and start accenting all of that.
Yeah, really nice. I mean, I can see where you're going. When you talked about earlier the idea of putting together music scoring, that's really,
Yeah.
I can tell that's where your heart lies. I mean, I would tell you just from that one song alone, it's very clear where you're going because you're already a storyteller, and that was very clear in that piece of music. And while it may not be sort of everybody's cup of tea, quote unquote, it communicates everything you wanted to. And I visually had a sense of what that song was doing and why it was doing it and why it was titled the way it was. So, yeah, no, I think, I look forward to sort of hearing your album when it gets released. It'll be fun. What are you going to be doing about promoting? So let's talk about that because obviously, you're not obviously doing playlisting, et cetera, but how do you feel about promoting your music? What are you doing to promote your music ultimately? And clearly this is a music that can't be performed live, so you have to get people interested in what you're doing in a studio session.
Right. So I will, I will gladly admit that marketing and promotion is what I'm worst at when it comes to my art.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Dreamers Club account on TikTok. I think Dreamers Club official, and I have one on Instagram, and I post about it there, and I'll make videos. I hope with this upcoming album, I'm working with an artist management company called Monarch Music Management down in Nashville that I helped found a little bit, or I helped with the creation of, because the CEO is a good friend of mine. So she's kind of consulting and advising and managing me. But my hope is as the album comes out and as the next few singles come out, I'll be able to get people interested through TikTok, which is where most music is found these days, as much as I can't stand that. And then my hope is to throw an album release party when the album comes out, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this music, this type of music, with your filmmaking abilities, really would do well promoting it through a TikTok, right? And through
Yeah,
YouTube. A lot of people still create in YouTube, but I find that YouTube is just almost impossible to break through anymore.
it really is. There's so much. It's so saturated.
Yeah, and so I think TikTok right now, and the algorithms, quite frankly, in TikTok versus YouTube, the algorithms in TikTok, and this is where I think it's why, honestly, in my humble opinion, they want to get rid of TikTok. My life is not that interesting to the Chinese. I really don't care what they find out about me. They get to watch me on Zoom calls. That's great. Okay, have a nice day.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, what they've done extremely well, in my opinion, is that as you watch the various creators, the algorithms keep pushing more and more of that content of the similar nature to you. So you don't get the girls jiggling around their midriffs. You're now watching, in my case, politics, music, creators, and filmmaking, right? So I see the kind of things that I want to see, and I find that those creators are more interesting to me. And as a result, putting your stuff into video and with your original music, you have the ability to sort of get hooked into build that audience, and ultimately have those algorithms push your stuff to the people who would be interested, and of course ultimately in your films. And I think to my way of thinking, having looked at a lot of this over time as a record label and dealing primarily in technology for most of my career, it's really critical that I think you find a venue, if you will, for your creativity and expressing that to the audience. Spotify is not the place for you to do this. It's not to put it on a playlist. This is a visual medium, although it is your music recorded, right? Just like I
Right.
said, I think, just as I mentioned earlier, this music connotes a very different feeling than I would expect just if I was going to sit down and listen to the Sorry Carnival. I'd want to know the backstory. I'd want to know a little bit more about you and why you did this, right? And all of that is communicated much more effectively through video, in my opinion.
I absolutely agree. And it's something that I feel is very helpful for running a multimedia company, is because we do film and we also do photography and we also do audio and music. So I am making these songs and I don't have to go to someone else if I want to get a music video done, or if I want to get any like videos about how I made my music done. I can just call up the other people that I work with and be like, hey, come to the studio for a day, bring a camera, and let's just shoot.
Right, exactly. Well, I guess, at the end of the day, as you think about other people who are trying to break into the business, and in particular, I will tell you, like, interestingly enough, one of my son's bandmates, who's our guitar player, actually did his undergraduate degree in film, came to Nashville, hasn't been able to find a opportunity for himself, quite frankly. So I'm going to make sure that he hears this podcast. But what would you advise to people trying to break into that area, particularly? I mean, filmmaking, film scoring, which are obviously hand in hand, and you are clearly building your chops, it seems to me, around those two elements, which clearly allow you to tell a story better than the average Joe. What would you offer the aspiring artist in terms of what you did, what they should do, and how you got to get where you got to?
So half of the answer, and I know this is kind of a cop out, but about half of the answer is dumb luck. Because at the end of the day, there is a lot of luck in this. Part of it is just who you know. And maybe at some point you run into someone at a coffee shop and goodness gracious, they happen to be a music producer. That hasn't happened to me yet. I hope it does. But there is an element of sometimes things happen for some people and sometimes they don't for other people. Aside from that, I am a very big believer in a good environment for art. When I work with people on my films, for example, and I've worked with, a fair amount of people who come onto my sets, not all of them think that my scripts are great. Not all of them think that that not all of them agree with my choices as a director or my choices when it comes to working with a cinematographer. But every single one of them comes back because they say I run a good set. And I think that in music and in film, it's so important to have people just enjoy being around you, because I'm still learning as a producer, but people still come back to me because they enjoy just working with me and being, in a creative relationship with me. And I think if you combine that with an unrelenting thirst for knowledge and always trying to learn more and understand more about how audio works and how film works, you will have a much better chance at succeeding and being in the right place at the right time than if you have all of this ambition, but you don't put in the effort to match the ambition.
Yeah, I think I tell people all the time, whether it's an artist who's releasing music, I talk about finding those 1,000 supporters, not the 100,000 occasionals that will
Absolutely.
that will spend that $100 a year with you. And in your case, obviously, it's a lot of building relationships, right? And I think what many people don't aspire to in today's social media environment, they assume that if I put something out on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, that people should come to me. And in fact, it's still a high touch business. It's really about getting out and networking and building relationships and letting people know who you are. And frankly, the contact. There's a great article I recently read from a psychologist who was doing some studies on social media versus personal contact. And he talked about the fact that social media really has diminished our ability to have real relationships with people. And he pointed out that when you're with somebody physically and you either touch them or look them in the eye, there's a whole hormonal change in your demeanor that actually causes affinity to happen. Now, I'm not talking about boyfriend, girlfriend. I'm talking about just an affinity for people generally. Obviously, it also moves into affinity for a woman or man in a relationship. But that doesn't happen over the internet. That doesn't happen on FaceTime. It doesn't happen on a Zoom call. And the physiological response has to be in person. So I tell people all the time, it's critical that you go reach out. I do a lot of my work on Zoom calls and on obviously computer work generally. And most of the work that I do on my record label, my tech company are in that area. One of the things I do, quite frankly, is I belong to a group here, a nonprofit called Home, which is got a lot of people aspiring to be musicians and producers, and they have a lot of meetings and just events, and that's important to just join people and meet them and talk a little bit. Nothing may come of it, but as you point out earlier, the serendipity, that luck factor may in fact kick in, and you find that one person who says, boy, I'd like to collab with you, or I'd like to do something unique. In that sense, it's a great opportunity.
Absolutely. There's a lot to be said for being in the right place at the right time. The more often you are in what could be the right place, the more often you'll be there at the right time.
Ben, I appreciate your time this evening, and I appreciate your music. I'll be looking forward to your July release of the album. The name is top secret. You'd have to kill me, but then again, you're on the podcast. Your website is benjaminkapit.com. That's benjaminkapit.com. You can find more out about Benjamin there, as well as his social media. And finally, he also has links to his company website there, which is, of course, Second World Entertainment. So we'll be looking forward to the Apocalypse series when that comes out. I hope you'll keep in touch with us. And I appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so very much, Ben.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for joining us this week on The Independent Musician. Make sure to visit our website, IronGateRecordsRadio.com, where you can subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming platform, so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate you giving us feedback or simply tell a friend about the show. Be sure to tune in next week for a new episode of The Independent Musician, where the independent musician is the star.